Hi, my name is Mark Biernat, and I'm getting a PhD in economics. In this video, we're going to discuss consumer surplus, deadweight loss, and price ceilings. And the specific example we are using is a price ceiling on a cup of coffee. So the idea here is sometimes laws are passed that would put a ceiling on a price. And this is generally, the intention here is to benefit society as a whole. Obviously there are some examples about rent control, etc., etc. But we're going to look specifically how to calculate and look at consumer surplus, deadweight loss, and be able to represent it graphically. And this is what you're usually tested on an exam. But it also has a great application in the real world, even if you're not an economics student and you want to make an argument or a conceptual framework of why price controls are not necessarily optimal. You can sketch it out, on the back of an envelope and prove your point through geometric equations, let's say. We could calculate it with numbers and math, but there's no need to. Better is to calculate deadweight loss, consumer surplus, based on simply a graphical representation. So let's take a look at the first graph. The first graph is really just a supply and demand curve, the price of coffee. Now, if you look at the United States currently, and the price of coffee, depending on what you get, a latte, cappuccino, let's say it's $4 at the coffee shop. And I personally don't drink coffee, and so I don't know anything about it. I used to drink coffee, but it made me too nervous, jittery. And I was thinking, well, maybe it's better if I just be natural. And I really like that, but whatever. So the cup of coffee is, like, from my understanding, is $4 at a coffee shop on average. And you can see the quantity demanded is going to be in equilibrium because the producers and the consumers agree mutually through the collective unconsciousness that this is the optimal price. If it's too low or too high, then either the producers or the consumers are going to be unhappy. Just think if there was a $20 cup of coffee, technically most people wouldn't drink it unless you're a total coffee fanatic and the producers, they're not going to generate the revenue. So $4, we've all agreed that that's about right. Now it's based on supply and demand. Now, the second thing we're looking at is consumer surplus. Very easy to figure out consumer surplus. Just the consumer surplus for the consumer is triangle A, shaded in light blue. For the producer, it's the coral color in B, the reddish coral color. And so we've got the combination is the total surplus, the total benefit. What you do is you find the equilibrium point on the graph and basically everything to the left of it. That's a quick tip. I mean, there are other ways you can do it and there may be some curveballs, but if you're on an exam or you want to figure it out, what is the total surplus? And surplus really means benefit to society. How much juice society is getting. And if it's divided between consumers and producers, it should be 50-50. You should get 50% consumers, 50% consumers. So we're all in agreement with that. $4, pretty nice for a cup of coffee. And again, I make the statement, anything to the left of the equilibrium point is benefit for society. It's the surplus. Now, let's look at something if we impose a price ceiling of $2. And it's counterintuitive because ceilings are always on the ground and price floors are on the top. So when we say price ceiling, it's the opposite. A ceiling is on the ground and a floor is on the top. Maybe if I were to reinvent economics, I'd reverse that terminology. But there's a reason for it, not important right now. And the first thing you want to note is a $2 price ceiling. Let's say, a politician says, let's give the United States of America a break. Let's put $2 on a cup of coffee. And then we hear a lot of cheers. because a lot of people are going to be drinking coffee. They're saying, this is great, it'll save me money, and the quantity of demanded actually increases. Because if coffee was $2, even me, somebody who doesn't drink coffee, I'd say, maybe I'd try some coffee once in a while. Sounds good to me. So you can see on the graph, the downward sloping blue demand curve, okay, intersects with $2 at a point way to the right of the equilibrium point. And similarly, the yellow sloping, well, yes, Y to the sky, supply to the sky, the yellow supply curve intersects at a supplied quantity way to the left of the equilibrium point. So that means producers, if I'm a producer of coffee and my cost is $3, for the most part, many producers will drop out of the game. I own some hipster coffee shop somewhere, and I'm hip and cool, but I know that in order for me to make a profit, let's say $4 is where I'm at, and now somebody says, some bright-eyed politician says, it's got to be $2. This is a control in the price. I'm going to cut down my production and maybe even close shop. So there's going to be something like a shortage. And automatically you see the shortage rising between the demand quantity and the supplied quantity. And that's what we see here. We see the price of coffee at $2 creates a shortage of coffee. And that's applicable to anything. If somebody said the price of gasoline was only going to be 1 penny, let's take an extreme. I like to take extremes to just show you, to illustrate a point. 1 penny. And then everybody's going to be, yay, hurrah, what a genius. We now have 1 penny gas. But then no producer is going to ship gasoline to the pump for 1 penny in the current situation, the current market. And this is what happens under communism. You have things like non-price rationing, bread lines, long lines at the pump, or in this case, at the coffee shop. There's non-price rationing. Maybe the official price is $2, but then you go and have to bribe the waitress at the coffee shop and give her an extra $2 or $3 to get your cup of coffee, because it's such a shortage. There's ways that you smile and you wink and you give her $2 or $4, and then magically she's able to produce a cup of coffee. And this is the way the world works. It's called non-price rationing, or that's actually more like black market rationing. But we've got a shortage here. And you see, now I didn't change the consumer surplus and the producer surplus yet. I'm just giving an illustration of where it was. Now let's see what it looks like. Okay, taking it away, and we see the shortage. And we can see I've kind of grayed out or faded the intersection of the equilibrium line at 4. And then next, we have another configuration. I'm showing that all the A points are consumer surplus, and the B point is the producer surplus. So in general, consumers win because there's a lot of people saying, hurrah, we've got $2 for a cup of coffee. And the producers are not happy. So they get a little bit of benefit. Maybe some of the producers grow coffee in their backyards in Florida, let's say, and are able to produce and be profitable at 2 cups of coffee. You could have a cottage industry of local growers in South Florida, and maybe somebody's able to forward a $2 cup of coffee. But for the most part, most of the producers lose. And it seems, at least in this case, the way the slope of the graph, because it always depends on the slope of the curves, that producers get a net benefit, and oftentimes they don't. They also get a net loss. So the producers lose and the consumers lose, and you'd have to actually do the mathematics of the geometry to calculate the consumer surplus vis-a-vis the old consumer surplus. And again, it depends on the slope of the curve. So let's see what this looks like. It's a loss for producer surplus. And when we shade it in, we can see the blue, again, the light blue being consumer, and the coral or the light red being for the producer. And that kind of exemplifies the point. Next, we see what the consumer and the producer loses. They lose the intersection and what used to hang on the old equilibrium point. They lose these two triangles. It's pretty evident from the shading, the color coding. So if I were on an exam, first thing I would do is draw the equilibrium point, and then second thing, at the price ceiling, I would draw a horizontal line all the way across until it hits the demand curve. And then I would shade off and find the producer surplus, and then I would shade and find the consumer surplus, and then I'd carve out the loss to society, both on the consumer and the producer side. And that's known as deadweight loss. That means nobody gains, nobody loses. If you notice, a square of what used to be the producer surplus is now allocated to the consumer surplus. They took it over. It's like I don't know, I'd use a metaphor for nations, but maybe a sports team better. They took a piece of the territory, and now they're past the 50-yard line. So this is a way to remember that deadweight loss is nobody's gain. Society loses. So whenever there's a price control, no matter what you think, there is a net loss to society. And when we talk surplus, we're talking utility, happiness, generally. Economics expresses itself in these linguistic terms that are specific, just like every discipline. And surplus means, let's say, profit, benefit, happiness. So society is less happy. Can you imagine if we controlled the price of everything, like under communism? Then you get all those happy faces you saw under communism. Sarcastic comment, but it's true. Generally, society flattens out in terms of happiness, because each person, I'm not a hyper-capitalist consumer or anything, but each person tries to satisfy their needs in the market. And coffee is a pretty guiltless, innocent pleasure. And if I'm a coffee drinker, somebody's denying me the ability because of a shortage or a control to drink more coffee, obviously my happiness utility goes down. But what if it was something like, books, the price of books, and we just didn't have access to books? I mean, I love reading. I'm a bookaholic. I consume books. Then my happiness would go down. Or chess sets. I love playing chess. My happiness would go down. So it doesn't have to be something, just purely consumer-oriented, plastic, one-time use, disposable, bright label type thing. It can be things that are really enriching to the human condition, like chess sets, books, and let's say, carrot juice or kale juice. But we're going to be denying people because producers don't want to produce and consumers are faced with a shortage. So let's look at this graph represented again in another way. I've got W, X, A, Y, B, Z. You could slice it any way you want, but the main idea is you need to know consumer surplus and producer surplus at equilibrium. You need to impose a ceiling or a floor, and that's the controlled price. You draw a horizontal line all the way to the demand curve, and then to the left of the initial equilibrium point, you're going to carve out the pieces. And if you can do that, you're in pretty good position. Now, again, the application to the real world is, yes, coffee, but you could apply that to anything. Anytime you hear somebody wants to control the price of education, medicine, coffee, gasoline, housing, the argument is you're going to have a net loss to society. Now, why would anybody do that? There are a few probably price controls in place even in free markets. Again, there's probably some benefit to society, like if you can control the price of education, keep it down, then maybe society as a whole benefits, but then you're reaching minds that might be limited by their economic ability to attend a school. And so, maybe there's some sort of subjective judgment or objective judgment that maybe it is good to limit the price of education in a particular case, because education benefits everybody. The more minds we can access, the more things are created, and we push the frontier of possibilities outward. So you can make or construe an argument. So I'm not, I joke I'm an unrepentant capitalist, but I'm not a hyper capitalist. I think there may be some cases for market intervention, but on a very limited basis. And price controls, you have to be very careful if you ever go down that road. And the argument is, you've got deadweight loss. You don't want deadweight loss in society. You don't want people not living up to their potential. There's going to be a lot of hipster coffee people producing coffee at coffee shops, and they're just going to be on vacation and not wasting their time. And maybe their time would be productively allocated somewhere else. But I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to subscribe, like. If you hit the subscribe button twice, it counts many times. No, actually, I think you subscribe and unsubscribe, but just hit it hard. And leave a comment if you have questions. Thank you very much. I like to have some videos that are a little bit educational and a little bit current and what is happening now. Thank you. Have a great day.